it's interesting. You get this language of fruitfulness throughout the whole of the biblical story. So right at the start, do you remember Adam and Eve in Genesis? God says to them, he says, be fruitful and multiply,
right?
Right?
Okay.
Now, so that kind of sounds like they should just have lots of kids. But then as the story goes on, it becomes clear that being fruitful for Israel is tied in very closely to whether they're obedient to the law, whether they're image bearers of their God. And so as the story goes on, when Israel is faithful, the land flourishes. When Israel is unfaithful, the land becomes barren.
Wait a second. I thought the fruitfulness was about lots of children.
Well, it's interesting because the beginning of the story begins with this mandate to have dominion, have loving rule over all of creation, and to be fruitful and to multiply and fill the earth, so that there are lots of people engaging in that loving rule. But then, of course, the first thing that happens, or the next thing that happens in the story, is this terrible fall. And that calling becomes distorted.
That had to do with fruit too, didn't it?
If it had to do with fruit too, that's exactly it.
A misuse of fruit.
Or the wrong fruit, or something like that. Yeah. So here they are, and they've had this wonderful calling to unfold creation and tend it and care for it, and that's become distorted. And so as the story goes on, there is still this calling to multiply and to be fruitful, but that calling has tied in with it this call to be people who heal creation, who bring healing. Okay. So the law, when the Israelites come out of Egypt and they're given the law, that law says, look, you're my image bearers, right? Throughout the law it says, be holy like I am holy. You're supposed to be like God. That's what the Israelites were called to be. But now there are all these laws that say being like me means freeing the slaves and caring for those who have nothing, and not taking people's cloaks overnight if you give them a loan, and leaving food at the edge of your field so that when the gleaners come, there's enough for them to gather up. All these laws, a lot of these laws, have to do with bringing healing into a creation that doesn't just need tending, but it needs justice, it needs brokenness to be fixed. And when Israel doesn't take that healing or redeeming, maybe redeeming's a better word, doesn't take that redeeming role on, then Israel isn't fruitful, isn't bearing fruit. And then the land doesn't become fruitful.
So then there's a sense of a barrenness in Israel, an infertility, both in their crops, and I would imagine this kind of permeates every dimension of their lives together. It just doesn't bear fruit.
This is exactly it. That's what, in fact, that's how idolatry is described. They don't bear fruit when they're following idols. And that's why you get this language of the barren mother, and this kind of language about Israel, because Israel can't bear fruit when she isn't being faithful and not following her God. So, when Jesus, then when you get to Jesus, Jesus starts talking about bearing fruit, right? And I am the vine and you are the branches. And we need to bear fruit if we are in Jesus. And by our fruit we will be known. None of that. I don't think Jesus is saying, by how many children we're going to be known as followers of Jesus. Though, I do know some people who think that. But anyway, not me personally, actually. But he's talking about if you're doing the kinds of things that Jesus calls you to do, then you will be bearing fruit. And that whole image theme comes up again, because just as Israel was called to image God and bear fruit, so Jesus shows us what it is to be the true image of God. And we then bear fruit as well. And that fruit is the fruit of the Spirit. That fruit is, you'll notice further on in Colossians, talks about the gospel bearing fruit, and then verse 10 of chapter 1 here, he says, beginning in verse 9, he says, since the day we've heard the gospel, right, since the day we heard it, What version do you have there? I'm working with the New Revised Standard Version. Is that?
I'm working the New Revised Standard Version too, and I don't think that there's reference to the gospel, but
no, that's their love in the Spirit. You're right.
That's right. Okay.
You're right. Okay, but since he's heard of their love in the Spirit, he's not ceased praying for you and asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, as you bear fruit in every good work and as you grow in the knowledge of God. I mean, Paul's making it clear that bearing fruit, that has to do with coming to know who Jesus is, but it goes way beyond that to the works of your life, how you are living your life, how you walk. That has to do with bearing fruit.
So if I'm going to understand something as simple and as innocent as Paul talking about the gospel bearing fruit and us bearing fruit in all of our lives, I need to know something about that whole Old Testament background.
I hate to tell you this, but you're going to have to read it.
I am?
Yeah. And you're going to have to pay attention when you
all of it?
Well, most of it. Yeah.
All right.
Even the bits that don't seem to fit.
All I was trying to do is understand, one verse, but okay.
Well, but there's more.
There's more?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Old Testament is incredibly important. And you know what? When I was growing up, I used to spend a lot of time in church reading the Bible. It was kind of handy because it was sitting there. And, well, the sermons were a little long sometimes, you read it. And so, knowing the Old Testament, that's what I did. I read it. It was really helpful. But you also have to know a little bit about the context of Colossians, who these people were, who the letter was written to, what they were struggling with. So when they heard language about fruitfulness, most of the people who read who heard it, I guess, because Colossians would be a letter that Tychicus brought, Tychicus and Onesimus, who came with him, and
wait, Onesimus, isn't he the guy from Philemon? And
you've read Philemon.
It's a small book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's short. Okay.
And he was Philemon's runaway slave.
That's right.
He was part of this story.
Well, this is the community. Philemon was from Colossae. In fact, I think that Colossians was written at the same time as Philemon. And when Paul showed up with Colossians, it wasn't Paul. When Tychicus showed up with Colossians, after the letter to the Colossians had been read to the community, he pulled Philemon, the letter to Philemon. It's actually to Philemon and Apphia and Archippus and those who meet in their house. That's who it's to. And I think Paul pulled that one out and read it right after this.
Well, that might help me understand Colossians.
That's right. So, you've got Tychicus, he's brought the letter. You have Onesimus, a runaway slave who's come back to the community. So they're probably, I would think that when Tychicus starts reading Colossians, well, they're probably wondering if he's going to say anything about Onesimus, because Onesimus has been with him.
Wow, I just imagine the tension in the room.
Oh, yeah, I think it was probably pretty tense.
If I understand it right, a runaway slave, that was a capital crime.
Well, yeah, that's right. He could kill him. He could brand his forehead so he could never run away again, because anybody who would see him would know he was a runaway slave. He could just beat him up bad and take him back in to the house. Or Philemon could, I guess he could set him free. He could do that too.
So while this letter is being read in the community, I would imagine that Philemon would have been up at the front because it's his house. Mm-hmm. And where's Onesimus? Cowering in the corner, perhaps.
Probably.
Wondering what's going to happen to him. Okay, we're probably getting ahead of ourselves.
Well, this is important. But the other
slavery thing is interesting.
Well, slavery is important because, don't forget, they're writing, they're all living in the context of the Roman Empire, right? So slavery's incredibly important in the empire. You okay there?
Just almost dropped my Bible. It's okay.
Yeah, you have small problems with coordination
on some things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, where were we before you started dropping the Bible?
You're talking about slavery.
Oh, slavery. Yeah. Okay. So, look, they're in the empire. Slavery is like the basic economic unit of the empire. Language of fruitfulness would have made people think about the promises that came from Caesar, that when Rome rules, everything will be abundant and fruitful. I mean, there was